Hi, it's Destiny from Desfix and welcome back to another video in the blog app using Django and React.js. In this one, we'll get started working with serializing our models. That is what we'll be doing. Hopefully you will enjoy the video and learn something new. So let's get started. To better understand what serializers are in Django, I want you to think of them as translators. They help convert complex informations like data from database into a language that computers can easily understand and share with other computers over the internet. So imagine you have a bookshelf full of books, each with its own title, author, and genre. If you wanted to tell someone about a specific book, you need to describe it in a way they'd understand. Like saying, this book is called Harry Potter. It's written by J.K. Rowling, and it's a fantasy story. That's how you explain it, right? In this example, the serializer is like your description of the book. It takes all the details about a book, such as its title, author, and genre, and turns them into a simple format that computers can read and share with others. So serializers help make it easy for computers to talk with each other by translating complex data into a language they can understand and share over the internet. I hope that makes sense. So with this simple definition, let's hop onto our project. I will open up the backend API, and over here we need to create a new file called serializer.py. And the very first serializer that we will need is the myTokenObtainPair serializer. So before I go ahead and explain what this does, let me quickly write out the code and you guys can see before I start explaining. So to import a couple of things, we need to say from django.contrib.auth.password validation, we need to import validate password. That is the first thing that we need. We also need from REST framework simple JWT token, from REST framework simple JWT .serializers, we need to import token obtain pair serializer, and we also need to import from REST framework import serializers, and we also need from REST framework validators. So from REST framework validators, we need to import unique valid. Okay, for now we won't actually be using this, so let me leave it out for now. And we also need from REST framework. Okay, let's just import our models. So I will say from API imports models as API underscore models. Now API models, you can as well call it as banana. You can also call it as milk shake. So it's not like a built-in name that you must call it. I can call it whatever I want. It's just like a variable name. So now I'm gonna say API models, okay? To stick to naming convention. Please take note of that. So now I'm going to create a new class here and I will call it should be TokenObtainPair serializer, but it shouldn't be the same name. So I want to add myTokenObtainPair serializer. And in here, it should inherit from TokenObtainPair serializer, which is coming from REST framework simple JWT.serializers. And now that we have that, the next thing that we want to do is define a class method. So class method. And then we need to define a custom method to get token for a user. Okay, so what we need to do is define get token instead. So define get token, and it takes in the class method and also the user. Okay, and now we need to call the parent class get token method and assign it to a variable called token. So token, it shouldn't be there. Okay, over here, this one should be token should be equal to super. Then we need to call the get token method that we have at the top. So dot get token. Okay, now we call that function and we need to pass in user. So what we pretty much did here was call the parent class get token, which is this one here, and we passed in the parameter user in here. Okay, which means we can now do things like if we want to assign a new claim to this token, we can now say token and pass in the key full name should be equal to user.full name, which is coming from the user model. So don't worry, you guys will see how this works. And for now, that is actually pretty much everything that we need, apart from the fact that you need to go ahead and return token. So you might be asking, What are all this? What is my token obtained per serializer? All this over here, what do they actually do? So let's break it down. Imagine you have a secret club with a special door that opens only for members who know the secret password. In computer terms, this is called authentication, proving that you're a member to access certain parts of a website or app. Now imagine you have a special way to give out secret passwords to members when they join the club. This is what my token obtained per serializer does. It's like a magical machine that creates secret password or tokens for members when they want to log into the club's website or app. When a member wants to log in, they send their email and password to the club's website or app. The website uses my token obtained per serializer to check if the email and password are correct and valid. And if they are, the serializer then creates a special token, or you could call it a secret password, just for that particular member. And let's say this token is like a key that unlocks the special door to the club's website or app. And once the member has the token, they can use it to access all the cool stuff inside the club, like their profile, messages, or even special events, or write a new blog post. So in simple terms, my token obtained per serializer is like a magical machine that creates secret password, which can be called tokens, for members to log into a website or app and access special features. So to better explain this, I want you to imagine that you have a magic wand that can do amazing tricks. Now, you want to share this wand with your friends, but before you do that, you want to add some special powers to it. In programming, or let's say in Django, the class method is like adding a special power to a method in a class. Now, in case you don't know, this get token over here is a method. Now we could even define something else that says maybe get name, and this over here is also a method. Okay, so functions defined in a class are methods. So in our example, this get token over here belongs to the class called my token obtained per serializer. And by adding this class method over here, we are saying, hey, this method can do cool stuff for the entire class over here, not just this individual method. I hope that makes sense. So let's break down what the get token does. Now let me say it's like a spell that creates a special token or a magical object for a user. So when you pass a user to this method, it creates a token for them. Now I will show you how we'll pass users to this method in the future. So whenever a user gets passed to this method over here, we immediately create a full name for them. But before we do that, we create a token. Then we start assigning some values into that token for them. So you can clearly see that in our method over here, which is the get token method, we are adding extra informations to the token, like the user's full name. We can also go ahead and also add the user's email, which means over here we need to call user.email. I hope you know that this will be linked to a profile or a user model in the future, so that we can get the full name and the email. And you could also go ahead, take it a step further, and even add the user name. And over here also, we add the user name. Okay. And if you want, you could also add, if you have specific IDs for authors or writers, you can add that over here. Now it's totally up to you how you want to do it. So this is like giving the token some extra powers, making it even more useful for your friends, which means instead of them accessing only one data, you could say, hey, I'm going to give you some more powers. You'll be able to access your full name, your email, your username. I hope that makes sense. So in very simple terms, class method allows you to create method in a class that can do special things for the entire class, not just the individual instance. It's like adding a magical power to your magic wand that everyone can use. I hope that makes sense. So let's go ahead and remove this. And now that we have this, it's pretty much what we want to do, nothing else. We now need to go ahead and create some more serializers. The next one will be the register serializer. So I'll say class, and I'll call the register serializer. And I think I need to pass in an A over here, okay, for the serializer. And this needs to inherit from serializers.model serializer. So this is now coming directly from REST framework serializers. Now, we need to define fields for the serializers. And for now, I will define only the password 1 and the password 2. So password should be serializers.character field. And does this ring a bell? You can see that clearly over here, we have this character field, which looks very, very similar to the model over here when we create character fields. So that rings a bell. It shows that just like we can create this for models, we can also do the same thing for serializers. And I want you to think of this as Django forms. Okay? So if you're familiar with Django forms, this should be a walk in the park for you. So over here, you can assign a couple of attributes to this field. For example, you could choose if you want this to be write only. Yep, we want this to be write only. Do we want this to be required? Yep, we want it to be required. And what validators do we want to use for this? So validators should be equal to, then I want to pass in the validate password. Now using this function, it will be able to check if this password over here is correct, not necessarily correct, but if it's validated, is it up to the length? Is it a simple text? Is it actually a text that can be used for a password? And you know, all that cool stuff. So you can go ahead and create password 2 and set this to serializers.character field over here. And I want you to still pass in write only should be equal to true. And also I want it to be required. So required should be equal to true. Now that we have this, I want to go ahead, create a new class meta. And in case you don't understand what class meta is, I believe you have seen it in a couple of tutorials that I've done over here. I added some class meta for some things. Okay, maybe I didn't. Okay, you can see class meta over here. And I think I have it in some other places too, like over here. But do you actually know what class meta does and what they are? So let's simplify what class meta are or what it is. Now imagine you're baking cookies and you have a special recipe book with different cookie recipes. Each recipe in the book has its own set of instructions, ingredients, and cooking times. In programming, a class is like a recipe in your recipe book. It defines how something should be structured and what it can do. Now imagine you have a special note at the beginning of each recipe that tells you which type of cookie it is and where to find the ingredients. In Python, the class meta is like a special note at the beginning of your recipe. It provides extra instruction or settings for your class. So when you see class meta, it's like saying, hey, here are some important details about this recipe. So in this example over here, we will go ahead and pass in the model that we want to interact with. So model should be equal to API models dot the user model. So you can see over here that we're passing in models that we want to interact with. So this is pretty much providing an instruction for this particular serializer, which is like a recipe for formatting and validating data. So this model over here in this class meta is pretty much saying that this class over here is associated with the user model that is coming from our API models over here. I hope that makes sense. So now that we have this out of the way, we need to also specify fields. So we are giving the class more information now that it should work with. So for fields, now you could go ahead and pass in the fields that you want to use. And you want to make sure that whatever field you pass in here exists in here in the user model or over here in the class, in the register serializer. So the full name exists, right? I also believe that the email exists. So email. And then the password does not exist over here in the model, but it exists over here. So you go ahead and still pass in the password 1 and password 2. But note, this isn't called password 1. Okay, so please do not make that mistake. Now let's create another method over here. This one will be called validate, and we'll use this one to validate passwords. I want to pass in self and attributes over there. And the very first thing I want to do is check if attributes of password 1 is equal to password 2, then we throw, or rather, instead of checking if it's equal to the same thing, let's check if it's not the same thing. So if what was typed into password 1 is not the same as what's typed into password 2, then let's raise a validation error. So how do we do that? Say if attributes of, then grab password is not equal to, which is not equal to, then attributes of password 2. Then what do we want to do in this case? Let's go ahead, raise a validation error. So validation But instead, let's say serializers dot validation error. There you go. And what do we want to raise an error for? Let's raise an error for the password field. And what do we want to pass in as the error? Let's say password fields didn't match. All right. Then after everything goes through, you need to go ahead and return attributes. So hopefully you already know that all functions, all methods must actually return something, or it won't actually know how to interact with this. So in this case, we are returning attributes. All right, that is pretty much it. Now let's go ahead and create the user by defining another method called create. So over here, I'll pass in self, and I also want to pass in the validated underscore data parameter. Don't worry, don't bother yourself. I'll show you how we use the validated data method. So what I want to do over here now is go ahead, create a new user by saying user should be equal to API models dot the user model dot objects dot create. Hopefully you already know how this works. Then I want to say full name should be equal to, now this full name, email, password, all this will be appended to the validated data, which you will see how this works. So that means you can grab the full name from the validated data by pretty much saying validated data, then full underscore name. Simple as that. Now you can go ahead and grab a couple more things like the password, or instead, let's grab the email instead. Okay. And instead of grabbing the password like that, we will actually have to set it. Because in Django, you can't just say password should be equal to password. It's not going to work. You have to specifically and explicitly set the password. But there is just one more thing I want to do before I continue. I want to be able to fill out the user name of this model. Because you can see that over here, we are not actually appending the username field, but the username field shouldn't be empty, right? Despite the fact that we have written this simple code over here to perform this operation, I want to show you how to still do this from the serializers. So what you simply want to do is exactly the same thing that we have done before. I'll say email username and mobile. And for this one, I simply need to split the email at. So I'll say user.email.split at. I've explained this before. So now user.username should be equal to email username. Simple. Now let's set the password. Django has a method called set password. And whatever you pass in here, it will go ahead, hash the password, and set it for the user. So to grab the password, remember you need to bring it from the validated password, and I want to set the password 1. But note the 1 isn't written there. And remember that you must save your model after you have made some changes to it. So we save the model. And remember that all method must return something. So we want to return user in this instance. That is pretty much it. The register is now looking good. Also, my token obtain pair, or you could even call it the login serializer, is now looking good. Now, the next thing on my list will be to create the user serializer. Now, from here, the serializer creation will now become easy. So we could say user serializer, and we pretty much need to pass in serializer dot model serializer. So that is the model that we want to interact with. And all we need to do is create a class meta. I hope you remember the explanation. It means that we want to set some more instruction or information to this class called user serializer. So firstly, we want to tell the serializer, hey, the model that you should interact with should be the user model. I think I have an issue over here. I call this models instead of model. So the model should be API model, user model. And also, what fields do we want to pass in here? I want to pass in all the fields that exist in the user model. Now, that is not recommended because we might not be using all the fields. So you could go ahead and specifically pass in the fields that you want to use. But for now, let's stick with adding all the fields, okay? And it will be the same thing for the profile. So if you don't want to type all this out, just pretty much duplicate it and change the user keyword to profile. Also change the user model to profile. We are done. Now we need to do the same thing for category. So over here, I'll say class category serializer, and this should inherit from serializers dot model serializer. Okay, so now what we want to do is firstly get the count of all the posts related to a particular category. So now I'm gonna say define get underscore post underscore count like this, and in here I want to pass in self and category. Don't worry, I will explain what this is doing. And then I want to return category dot posts dot count. Now, in case you don't understand what this does, let me quickly give an explanation for what it does. So in Django, when you define a foreign key relationship to one model from another, for example, you know that in the post model, let me quickly hop over to the post model. You can see that we have a model called category here. So as soon as you define a foreign key from a model to another model, Django creates a reverse relationship from the related model back to the model that has the foreign key. By default, this reverse relationship is named model underscore set. And in this case over here in our serializer, since the post model has a foreign key to the category model, Django creates this reverse relationship from the category to the post, which means we can say category.posts.count, which means we get all the posts count that has the category listed in them as a foreign key. I hope that makes sense. So after you've done that, we now need to create a class meta, which means we want to provide more information to this class called category serializer. The first one is telling it the model that we want to interact with. So we want to tell it to interact with the category model. And what field do we want to append to this? Now you can append all the fields, or you could specifically append the ID field. You could also append the title field. You could also append the image. You could also append the slug. You could also append let's append the post count. So post underscore count. So now after we have added all this, that's pretty much it. There is something called depths in Django. So you can see that actually we don't have any depths that work for this. But when we start working with the post model or the post serializer, based on the fact that it has a category foreign key in it, instead of just displaying the ID of the foreign key, I want to display all the informations related to that category while we are in the post serializer. I know it might sound like gibberish now, it also might sound like a lot to you, but don't worry, when you see it in action and see the examples, you will be able to understand what is going on. So let's go ahead, create the comment serializer. So just down here, you could even duplicate that one if you want. If you don't want to duplicate it, just say class, that should be lowercase c, class comment serializer. And over here, we want to pass in serializer.model serializer. Okay. And after you've done that, create a new class meta. And we need to say models should be equal to API model.comment. And what fields do we want to pass in? So fields should be equal to, and let me just stick with all for now. Now remember what I told you about adding fields, okay? Then I want to define a depth. So I want to say define underscore underscore init. So I'll pass in self, and I also need to pass in args and wags. And after I've done this, I will pass in super. Then over here, I need to interact with the comment serializer and also pass in self. Then underscore underscore init. I need to call this function again. Then pass in args and wags. Don't worry, you see what this does. And now what I need to say is request. That should be requests, just like this. Should be equal to self.context.get. And we want to get whatever the request is, or the request method is. Now the request method can be post or get. So if request actually exists and the request.method is equal to a post method, what do we want it to do? let's set the self.meta.depth to be 0. Else, the same thing, self.meta.depth should be. Now, it totally depends on how you want to set this. Let's start off with 1. Okay, so don't worry, I'll show you guys how this works in the future. With examples, you better explain what's going on than the raw definition of it. Okay, don't worry, I'm going to show you guys. We'll be using this a lot in this tutorial. So after we've done that, we also need the post serializer. So just that. You know what? I'm going to take everything over here and paste it down because I don't want to keep typing all this out. So I'll say post, and the model should be post. Now, this should remain the same. You just need to change the comment serializer to post. Everything is the same. We are done. Now, I also need another one for the bookmark. So you can still take this one, duplicate it, and change all the posts here to bookmark. And there you go. And also make sure to change the depth to bookmark serializer. And we need one more for the notifications. So copy this, and down here I will create the notification, and here it should be notification serializer, and here it should be notification serializer. All right, so the very final thing that I need over here is to create a custom serializer that will be called auto serializer, and this should pretty much inherit from serializers.serializer because we don't want to interact with any model in this one. That is why we are not making it a model serializer. That is why in Django models py, if you're going to be interacting with model fields, you need to make it a model.model over here. I hope that makes sense. So since we are not interacting with any model, I just want to create a raw serializer. And we will need to pass in a couple of fields in here, like how many views this author has gotten in total. And for that one, it will be serializers.integer field. Default should be 0. Now you can go ahead and duplicate this in 4 more places. This one should be how many posts the author has got. This one should be how many likes they have got. This one should be how many bookmarks they have got. So that is pretty much it for the serializer. I know it took quite some time, but I had to explain what most of the things are doing here so that you better understand how they work when we start working with the tutorial. What I didn't in-depthly explain is this depth over here, which I'll show you the live action of what it does. That is pretty much it. Do make sure to drop a like on the video. Consider subscribing, as it really means the world to me. If you're looking to build fast websites with professional and modern components, then I highly recommend that you check out nestblog.app. Over there, you can get tons of components for Tailwind CSS, Bootstrap, Boomer, Materialize, and even pure CSS to help streamline your project and make them professional and faster. Also, check out some of the courses in the description below. One of them there might help you become a better Python, Django, and even React developer. I hope to see you in the next video. Until then, much love. Peace out.